Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Q&A about business, innovation, and managing life. And I see I have a bunch of questions that people have sent in here. Let me see where to start. Sora asks, for the new notebook assistant, what is the process for making a new product like that? Okay, first I should say we released a lovely new product last week, a Wolfram Notebook Assistant, which is a system for helping people use Wolfram Language that is rather impressive in terms of the way that it kind of knits together sort of AI capabilities with our computational capabilities to give one kind of a conversational interface to being able to think about things computationally. It really has surprised me a lot. Two reasons. One, I thought I knew Wolfram Language really well. I should do. But yet, this notebook assistant is helping me to be a better, faster, more efficient programmer, which is great. And it's also helping me to be a bit bolder in some of the things I'm doing because I can just sort of ask it something that isn't really very well thought out, and it will come up with something computational that I can use, think about, etc. So it's great even for the experts like me, but the really exciting thing is for people who aren't quite there in terms of thinking computationally about things, don't know Wolfram Language, and this is kind of a terrific on-ramp for going from just, I have a vague idea, to here's a sample of how you can do that computationally. So I'm pretty excited about that product. Now, what was involved in building that product? Actually, we were just working out, I think it was 73 people were involved as the thing kind of got close to completion. We started working on that product in the middle of last year. So it's been like an 18-month process. What was interesting about a product like this is, this isn't always the case, but the first question is, can you imagine what the product will be like? And that's often quite challenging because when we're building things where nobody's ever built something like that before, one doesn't know. One has to, in a sense, I suppose, if I have a skill, it's in trying to do a good job of imagining that. The first question is, imagine what the product might be like. The second question is, can one actually build it? Or is it just outright impossible in the current state of technology? Now, even in the earlier part of last year, ChatGPT was freshly up and out there. We had built kind of plugins for ChatGPT. I'd written what turned into a book about ChatGPT. That was back in like February of last year. So just a couple of months after ChatGPT came on the scene. And we started to integrate the possibility of having chat interactions into our notebook technology for Wolfram Language. And so we released our first sort of chat notebook capabilities in, probably, I don't know, April or May of last year, of 2023. And that let people kind of connect to OpenAI or whoever as their LLM provider, and then have kind of a chat, which would be sort of an independent chat, independent of what was going on in the notebook, and with some information about Wolfram Language, and some of that is in the training data for generic LLMs anyway, and some being added, but not sort of heavily customized into our environment. So now the question was, how could one do that heavy customization, and how well would it work when one did that? And we had to build a lot of tooling to make that possible. And we had to build a lot of things to do with retrieval augmented generation using vector databases, computational augmented generation using tools, using Wolfram Language, and so on. It's been a big stack. And then the question is, okay, well, it's sort of complicated because you kind of have a guess what this product is going to be like. Actually, there's another product which is sort of competing for progress with this product, which was much more of a consumer play, which will come out later now. And I wasn't sure which horse to back first, whether we should back the more direct consumer play or whether we should back the notebook assistant play that is more aimed at people who are already in our technology ecosystem, so to speak. And at the beginning, I was sort of a little bit more pushing the pure consumer side of it, which to people outside of our technology ecosystem. And then was a few months ago, a lot of the development is really in parallel for those two products. And a few months ago, I kind of made the decision, no, we're going to bring Notebook Assistant out first, partly because realistically, we have a very clear market for that from a large number of people who already use our technology or who've been involved with our technology in one way or another, or adjacent to people using our technology. We know who those people are. In a pure consumer play, while we have a lot of much closer to pure consumers, well, both through Wolfram Alpha and through the other companies that integrate Wolfram Alpha into intelligent assistants and things like this, and now LLM offerings. It's a less direct path to actual sort of who should get this. With what I realized as we could see how good Notebook Assistant was ending up being, it was clear everybody who uses our technology should be using this Notebook Assistant. So we know who the customers should be. And then beyond those people, well, there are people who should be using our technology, but aren't yet because they need something like Notebook Assistant. So, but in terms of pulling this together, what does it actually take? Any new product that's never been invented before takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of kind of energy and leadership to make it happen. So, for example, as a practical matter, in the run-up to this product release, I had a meeting every single day with a quite large team working on this product, and every single day there are new and different issues that have to be addressed. Whether those issues are, this piece of user experience needs to be designed, that design doesn't make sense, whether it's this piece of infrastructure needs to be cleaned up, whether it's this thing about messaging needs to be changed, whether it's this other team that is helping us to provide training data for our for the system we're building, that's a quite separate part of the company, needs to kind of ramp that up, and priorities need to change so that we deliver that in time and so on. It's a daily story to make that happen. And I don't think I've ever seen us produce a sort of serious innovative product without the kind of end game of the forced march of daily meetings and so on to just address all the different issues. And I think one of the things for me is sort of CEOing this is you've got to make lots of decisions fairly quickly and not make too many mistakes. And that's one sees in those daily meetings, everyone will have involved, I don't know, at least 5 or 10 decisions, and they have to be made in that meeting with reasonable sort of success rate. Now, it's also occasionally there'll be things where I said, do this, people do it, I look at it and I say, that wasn't a good idea. We've got to go back and change that. And one has to be prepared to do that because otherwise you release a product that has things in it that aren't good ideas. Now, also, there are things where you say, one of the things about designing a product like this is you don't know what you have until you can feel it yourself, so to speak, until you can actually use it and see what it feels like. You don't really know what you have. And that this product, if I were to criticize our development process, the team, despite my efforts, it took it a little bit further than they should have done without me really being able to use it and other people around the company really being able to use it. Partly that was a consequence of some infrastructure issues that just made it difficult to deploy the thing in a smooth way for different people and so on. That's not really a great excuse, but that was the sort of proximate reason that it didn't get deployed more widely, more quickly within our company, which would have helped to shake out a number of things because we got it to within a couple of months of release. And I did have a chance to really look at it, and I'm like, this thing is not right. We've got to change that. That doesn't make sense. And that was unfortunately the foundational tooling for the product was really very well built. And so even things which are to a user pretty dramatic changes were pretty easy to implement, given the underlying foundational tooling and the whole Wolfram Language stack that was built to make that possible. But I think there's this question of, when you're making a new product and you ask people, the things one thing you learn by asking people about a new product you're making is whether people understand what the point is. You don't necessarily get a good idea of whether sometimes people will say, that's a fantastic idea, but they haven't really internalized how they'll use it. And sometimes people say, that's a terrible idea. And they give you all kinds of reasons why it's going to fail. Like, the AIs are not strong enough. The AIs will cost too much. The AIs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's lots of reasons why it might not work. My tendency is not really to listen to much of that stuff. The thing that is useful to listen to in a situation like this is when you try and explain what the product is, you do people understand it? Can you give a 1 or 2 sentence description and have people understand it? For example, for this product, I will say that for a lot of its development, it was named the Code Assistant. And that wasn't, we changed that name pretty soon before the end, realizing that really wasn't the right message, because it's not necessarily for people who think they're writing code. It does write code. That's its main point. But it's for people who want to solve a problem, they want to think computationally about something, and it's happening in the framework of a notebook. But it's not really about, when you say code assistant, you more think about software engineering and things like that. It will be useful to such people, but a large part of its market is not people who would ever identify themselves as software engineers. It's people who are doing field X, whatever it is, and they want to make it computational X. This is the product for them. This is the thing that gets anybody from X to computational X. And actually, that's a pretty good way to say it. Maybe we should use that. Really what I've talked about a bunch is kind of going computational with things. So let's see what else to say about new products. I mean, it's one thing that happens when you build a product that hasn't been built before is there isn't a team that does that. So the team has to be kind of synthesized from pieces of existing teams. And sometimes you don't even know what skills are going to be needed. And so one of the things that's always a challenge in terms of making such a project happen is that there are always gaps. There are always things like, well, who is it who's supposed to take the quality assurance examples and turn them into training material for an LLM? Is that the quality assurance group? Is that the machine learning group? Is that the curation group? Who is that? And somebody has to decide that, and that has to get figured out. And there isn't really, you can't say, well, yes, we have a group that just does that. There's always little gaps. And those gaps often require quite a bit of figuring out and sometimes quite a bit of pressure, pushing on the two sides, so to speak, to figure out who's really going to fill in that piece in the middle, and quite often, what I find myself doing is you invent a lot of stuff. You invent a lot of, well, what are we going to, we've got some particular piece of capability. We sort of named it the inspiration button. Well, that was kind of my name for it because somebody in the graphic design group had produced an icon. Maybe I don't know whether I suggested it or not, but anyway, they'd produced a light bulb as an icon to represent that piece of functionality. And so that kind of led me to say, well, let's call it the inspiration button. And once you have a name like that for it, it really helps in sort of crystallizing how you think about things. I have to say, one of the things for me, maybe it's because I've spent too much of my life as a language designer, I don't know, but having a name for a thing you're building is really quite important. And having a name that doesn't confuse one about what it is also important, which is why, for example, that code assistant name was confusing. It was confusing even internally with people about what is this for? Is this for software engineers or is it more general? And I think what one often finds out is that as one tries to come up with a name for a thing, one realizes, I don't really know what this thing is. And as you try and think through, well, what are you trying to capture in the name? You also get to think about what actually is this thing. And that happened a zillion times in the creation of this notebook assistant product. Let's see, there was a follow-on to that question. Oops. Asking, is it easier or harder to create something brand new with no competition, or easier when there are competing products to compare? I think this depends a bit on sort of the personality of the leader and the personality of the organization. I am very much I just want to build stuff. I don't really care what exists elsewhere. I'm not sort of positioning myself based on this and this exists. Now I'm going to make something that fills in the other side of the triangle or something. Different people work differently. I mean, there are definitely companies that are commercially very successful that really aren't about having new ideas. They're about seeing what's out there in the marketplace and kind of foraging the ideas and perhaps cleaning them up, implementing them better, maybe buying companies that already have those ideas, those kinds of things. My own personal approach, and maybe this is a piece of sort of personal egotism, is I'm more interested in building things that really are things that we created from nothing. I like to think of them as kind of alien artifacts that we've been able to deliver, artifacts from the future that we can kind of deliver and uniquely do so. So for me, it's much more, the thing that I really get excited about is building things that have never been built before, where everything is new. You have to figure out everything. And, that's not for everybody. You need quite a large amount of confidence and some kind of, and you need knowledge to not just do the wrong thing. And I don't think it's for everybody. In some sense, it might be easier to just say, well, let's interpolate what already exists out there and just fill in good execution of what exists. And it's a good commercial strategy in many cases. People often, it's a sad fact that the pioneers in an area are often not the real winners, because they thought about 100 issues and they solved so many of those issues, but it turns out there are only 5 issues that one actually cares about. And if you come in later and you know what those 5 issues are, you can just barrel through and make something more streamlined, cheaper to produce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, only dealing with the 5 issues, not the other 95, and among other things. And also, you just get to see, after there's been a pioneering thing, you get to kind of see what there is out there that is what was important about it. How do you sort of clean up the concept and sleekly move forward, so to speak? I have to say for myself, given that I'm most interested in building things that really haven't been built before, I do tend to think about things that leverage a large part of the technology stack that we have, because frankly, those are things that are really much more uniquely buildable by us. And it's not like somebody can come along and say, well, I saw what you built, and now I'm going to just bite off a little piece of it and build just that part and zoom past you, so to speak, by just building that part. So for me, it tends to be, I'm always it makes me feel optimistic when what we're building is making use of just this huge technology sort of stack that we built over the last 40 years. And in fact, with Notebook Assistant, although it's not obvious when you first sort of see it, there's pretty deep technology underneath it that pretty much leverages the whole sort of spectrum of things that we've been doing. So for me, that's a much better thing to do. Now, when you build a team, if you're building a team and you're telling them you're going to do something that's never been done before, that's one kind of leadership that's needed to make that team successful. It's a different kind of leadership you need if you're saying, well, I'm going to hire this person from here, that person from there. You've all done something like this before. Now we're coming together. We're going to do it right. And we're going to do, version 2, so to speak. And we're going to be able to sort of zoom past everybody else. that's a different kind of leadership that's needed from the, we're going to do something from scratch that's never been done before. We don't even know if it's possible. And we're going to have to feel out as we go how it works. Personally, I much prefer that kind of situation, and that's what I've spent my life doing. It requires different kinds of people, different kinds of leadership. It requires, I think it is important that, I mean, maybe this is just in my particular case, this is the way I've done it, but that having a leader who can actually figure out those next steps to take that were things where you just have to, you know, jump off the cliff and see what happens type thing, where you just have to pick a direction and go with it, so to speak. I actually not jump off a cliff. It's really more like you know, you're picking the path, and there were many paths, and you just have to pick a definite path and go down that path. And that's you have to, I think it's really useful to have a leader who is confident enough and hopefully competent enough to do that. It is not something where if you have a team of people and you say, hey, we've got 10 things we might do, you guys, all you dozen people, figure out what we should do. I don't think that works very well. I think, and particularly, it doesn't work quickly. And often, and particularly, for example, in bringing out this particular new product, that even though it took 18 months altogether, there was a lot of intensity at the end. There's a lot of kind of gestation where you have to see what works and you have to push forward, and there's pieces of tooling that have to be built and so on. But then when that's all coming together, there's a lot of pushing that needs to happen, a lot of decisions that have to be made quite quickly. And I just don't think that can be done with sort of a committee of people. I think that ends up being a single leader type story. Now, you know, in the doing of that project, by the way, I should say, in the way we tend to do projects, that we have strong sort of project management mechanisms and strong project managers who are kind of making sure that all those pieces, because when you're building a product like that, another thing to realize is there's just a lot of pieces that have to come together. You know, there are lots of you know, tickets in the project management system and all that kind of thing. You know, that icon has to be done. That thing has to be deployed on a you know, a responsively for the web, and that has to be this has to happen there, and so on. This policy has to be put in the policy database for purchases of this and that and the other. There's just a lot of threads that have to be followed, and it's important to have kind of an infrastructure of people who know how to follow those threads and have done it for previous projects, know how to connect to different groups at the company, and can surface things where it's like, wait a minute, you know, we're stuck here. We don't know what's going on. We need help. You know, somebody has to make that decision type thing. And that's what was happening at our daily meetings every day, is lots of those things being surfaced. Let's see. I'm happy to see Prab commenting that he tried out Notebook Assistant and it seemed to be working nicely. So I'm glad to hear it. Let's see. W is commenting they bought a subscription for a 12-year-old kid, and what's the best way to kind of introduce our technology to folks of that age? There are a bunch of things that we have for that. There's I believe, a computational adventures program that we have. There's also a book that I wrote, which that's on the younger end, but I think I've always claimed age 11 and up is kind of what it's intended for. It's called Elementary Introduction to Wolfram Language. You can find it on the web. There's a website version of it, and it has exercises you can do and things like that. I would say that that's a good place to start, because it kind of shows you what's possible, what kinds of things one might do computationally, so to speak. Computational adventures, which I think might use some material of mine, but I haven't been myself personally involved in building, is is something which I think is leading through a series of different activities intended for folks of kind of the middle schoolish age, I think. Um, I would say in terms of the notebook assistant and Wolfram Language right now, it's so long as you have an idea what you want to do, then just try asking the notebook assistant to help you do it and see what it does. Is a good start. But I think that it requires a little bit of kind of a little bit of pre-understanding of what you might use a computer for in this kind of way. You know, I have to tell a story, maybe I've told this before, of the very first time that I saw a computer, which was when I was maybe 9 years old, 10 years old. And of course, that was a long time ago. That was the late 1960s. And computers weren't, I don't know how many computers there were in the world by then, maybe 1,000, I don't know. And computers were the size of a room at that time, and or many computers were the size, but serious computers were mainframe computers the size of a room, so to speak. And you know, somebody takes me to go see this computer. It's kind of cool, and it's got all these tapes flipping back and forth and all that kind of thing. And they're like, well, okay, what do you want to do with this computer? And it's like, I don't know. You know, the 9-year-old me had no conception of what you could, quote, do with a computer. And, you know, I think came up with some lame thing about, asking about the weight of a dinosaur, not really realizing, I mean, in modern times with Wolfram Alpha and so on, we have a big knowledge base where you can just walk up to the computer and ask it the weight of a dinosaur. You might be able to search for that on the web too, but you could compute things about it, any time since Wolfram Alpha's existed 15 years ago. But to me, it's kind of like, okay, what should the computer do? It's kind of like you freeze if you don't really have a conception of what it could do. And I think that's kind of the first thing to get is sort of an idea what might be computational. What's a thing that you're thinking about that you might make computational and find that interesting, so to speak. And I think perhaps the things like this elementary introduction book of mine are a good priming for that. If you already have an idea of what direction you want to go in, just try asking the notebook assistant and see what it produces, because it's going to try and take whatever you said and make it computational. And it will, in my experience, it is remarkably good at coming up with something interesting, which is at least, which is responsive to what you asked. It might not be precisely what you asked. I was doing a demo of it internally at our company before it was released. And I was like, let me think of something I can ask it where it's going to fail. Okay. And I asked it something about asteroid. How would I mine an asteroid? Which I thought it's not going to say anything sensible here. But actually I was wrong, because it started trotting out, here's how we can compute what asteroids are near Earth. It has data on, we have data in our knowledge base on the metallicity of asteroids and so on. And it was figuring out a bunch of stuff about sort of from kind of general knowledge. It was talking about metallic asteroids might be a good idea. And then it was working out with the actual computations that we can do, what asteroids are going to be near the Earth and so on. And that was an example where I just assumed it would say some platitudes and then give up type thing. But I was wrong. It actually managed to dig in and find sort of a computational link that it could get going on. And I think that's a pretty interesting thing to see, but you kind of have to have some initial vector. The alternative is to really look at sort of things from the computational point of view, and I would recommend this little thing that I wrote a few years ago along those lines. Let's see. Okay, actually, W is suggesting here, provide a feature to ask a random question in plain English and get a concise answer with graphics. Well, yes, you can absolutely do that with Notebook Assistant, and you can do a little bit of that with Wolfram Alpha, but you can do that seriously with Notebook Assistant, and that is a reasonable place to start. Just try it, see what happens. Let me know. I'd like to know. Des asks, do you ever watch funny cat videos? It's really strange. When the internet was much younger, I often used sort of pictures of cats as an example of, or even as sort of an example of a random thing one might get, long before that seemed to be popular. And then now that cat videos are all over the internet, it's kind of amusing for me. I have to say I'm not a I'm really maybe once every few years I'll watch a few seconds of some funny animal video. I like them. It's just not something that fits into my typical day. I will say though that I ended up doing a piece of science, when was it? Last year, that ended up turning into what my team referred to as the cats piece, because it was centered on pictures of cats. I was interested in understanding kind of the inner workings of the mind of an AI and what one could learn from that about kind of alien minds. And so I was using a generative AI system and looking at kind of what the space of possible images generated by a generative AI system is like. And I needed a kind of a characteristic kind of image you might generate. So the one that I picked was a cat in a party hat, because I didn't want just a cat, because that could be a photograph. A cat in a party hat, well, maybe somebody puts party hats on cats, but it's a little bit more of a synthesized kind of image. And so I ended up with, well, it wasn't really cat video, it was mostly cat images, but I've ended up with an awful lot of cat images that go from the central cat image along the sort of cat island of things that are quite humanly identified as cats, out into kind of inter-concept space of things that are sort of images of things that we don't have names for in our language, which is kind of what I was interested in studying. Let's see. Tennis is asking comments about apparently Nvidia's CEO's approach to sending everything through emails and having 60 people directly report to him all day with email reports. I don't know, hands-on. I tend to be quite a hands-on manager of things. I mean, I tend to like to set things up so that there are lots of projects going on, and any given project, I kind of know what my level of involvement is, which is pretty much parameterized by if there's going to be a meeting about that project, how frequent is that meeting going to be? Is it every month? Is it every day? Is it every quarter? What is it? And that kind of is a good calibration of kind of what my level of involvement is. But I also expect, I mean, from our company is pretty email based, at least as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there's a kind of a chat channel which I am not part of because it just doesn't work with the rhythm of my day. Because for my day, it's kind of scheduled with meetings all the time, or I'm working by myself, so to speak, maybe writing something or something like that. But if I'm in a meeting, then I got to be, I'm paying attention to that meeting. I'm not paying attention to some stream of messages that's coming alongside it. I mean, I want to be there, actually 100% on what I'm supposed to be thinking about, rather than being sort of fragmented. And so for me, email is the principal mechanism for sort of getting things in. And I get, I don't know, maybe 500 emails a day. Unfortunately, every so often a little piece of spam pokes through, and that's always nice because just hit the delete button. And some of that mail is reports of various kinds, which I like to kind of glance at, and I get some kind of overall feeling of this is the kind of texture of what's happening in some group at the company, because I'm seeing monthly reports or something, and I get the idea, oh yeah, I kind of know roughly what those guys are doing now, as opposed to I'm just totally blind, even if I'm not reading every line of the report. And sometimes I'll, even if it's a pretty long thing, I will, every so often I'll kind of sample it because for whatever reason it sort of piqued my interest, or I'm curious about some aspect of that part of what's going on. I will say that I get an awful lot of very contentful email, including a lot from sort of outside people. That's always a challenge. Right now, I have I have lots of analytics, so I can always see how backed up I am. And right now, I'm really backed up. So if anybody's out there who's sent me a wonderful piece of email in the last few months, I apologize because I might not have gotten to it. Generally, eventually, I think, hopefully I'll never have to, declare email bankruptcy or something. But eventually I'll get to it. But it might take me a while. What I try to do is to have kind of buckets for where that goes, whether that goes to a particular group, to a particular type of response, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the approach I take. But that's that's how I tend to do these things. Let's see. Aaron is commenting, they'd like to see software development discussions from the ground up, sort of a complement to my live CEOing series. It's okay, and I guess Aaron here is interested in sort of both ends of the story. So in the sort of live CEOing live streams that I do a lot of, that's really at the stage of functional design of functions, particular functions for Wolfram Language. So there are two pieces of that story that aren't part of that. One is the original sort of strategic discussion about, is this a direction we should be going in? That's one part. The other part is, and now here's a bunch of software engineering that actually implements this thing. That second part is not a part that I'm directly involved in. So I'm typically, I mean, sometimes, I have to say, sometimes out of either wanting to understand it better or out of frustration, I will actually write a piece of code that's a prototype. I mean, I write Wolfram Language code all the time, but that's mostly for research kinds of things that I'm doing. But sometimes I'll write a prototype of something that's actually intended to be a feature of the language or whatever. And that's sometimes because I don't think I understand it very well, and there's no point in me trying to explain it to somebody. I just got to try some things. And sometimes, honestly, that's because I'm kind of frustrated and people are kind of flapping around and not managing to get anything done. And I'm like, look, I can write this thing in 10 minutes. Let me write a sample of what can be done here. But so I'm mostly not involved in the kind of software engineering, the sort of specific software engineering of things. I have to say, I think some live streams about that will be interesting. I'm not sure if the people involved are necessarily up for sort of reality view of what they do. I have to say about live streaming of design reviews and things, I've been sort of surprised. We've been doing that now for what, I don't know, what it is, 6 years or something. And so far as I know, nobody else is doing that. And I realized that maybe I'm prepared to sort of put myself out there more than other folks are prepared to, because, if you watch these design reviews, things will come up. I'll say things. Turns out I might be wrong in the end. Turns out, it may get quite aggressive because it's kind of like people have strong opinions, which is very good. I mean, it's in a situation where we're building something, we're trying to build something great. The fact that people have strong opinions about how it should be is really a good thing, and it means that the thing we build is likely to be much better. But it also means that as somebody running a meeting, you kind of have to manage the aggression of people saying it's got to be this way type thing. So I think I don't know the extent to which, as I say, I seem to be, I'm prepared to do this. I even like doing this and live streaming these things, but I think we're not quite at the point where the sort of software engineering, the kind of folks doing that execution may be at that point. In terms of the kind of original kind of ideation of what to do, the reason that's not quite as easy to live stream is because most of the time, those discussions are either entangled with a lot of other stuff about people and groups, and this particular group is being built up and this whatever, and it's lots of things about people, or it's something where these ideas come up in the context of conversations that are really about completely different things, and it's not it doesn't have the character of being like, and in this hour we're going to have the big idea about this or that thing. That does happen from time to time, and I think we have tried to live stream a few of those. But it's an interesting suggestion to try and do more of that. I think it would be, I kind of feel that we have to have some expectation of what the agenda is, so to speak, when we're going to impose it on the world in that way. Monica asks the question, do you have a cat? The answer is no. I uh, I did when I was a kid, actually. Um, my my wife is probably the it's kind of cats and furniture are thought to not get along so well, and so that's one reason for no cats. The other thing is uh, between various members of my family, it's kind of like allergies to cats. Actually, I have to say, I have sort of thought I had some kind of allergy to cats, and I think I do. And I finally just happened to get because I like to do all these kind of test everything type things. I just got some whole set of blood tests, and it was kind of like, oh, I might as well do all these allergy tests since those are now available. Did a huge collection of them, and yes, I am allergic to some particular protein associated with cats. So yes, I am allergic to cats a bit. I have to say I was perhaps I shouldn't say, but it's sort of funny. I've always claimed that I'm kind of allergic to seafood, and I just don't like seafood. I think I don't like the concept of I can see the whole animal, I'm eating it type thing. I'm too squeamish for that. And so for just years, I mean, ever since I was a kid, long before allergies were common, I would claim at age, 12 or something, I can't eat that, I'm allergic to that. And nobody really knew what that meant in, 1972 or whatever. But it was like, oh, okay, maybe you shouldn't eat that. And so I'd claimed that for a long time about seafood. And so I was a little bit thrilled a few days ago to see these test results come back that, yes, I am actually at least slightly allergic to that. So it made it validated my long time claim that I really hadn't known. It was a psychological allergy before that, rather than an actual, immunoglobulins are coming in to bind to it type thing. Ozzy is asking, how many meetings do I attend in a day? Well, I have that information in great detail. I'm not sure I can. Let me see. I can. Well, the last few days I have. Typically, I will start okay, I'm a late riser. I'll start at 11:30 and I will go until 6, and then I'll start again at something at 8:30, and I will go until 2:30 in the morning. Although quite often that's just working by myself in the end, sometimes working with people in other time zones. I often have what I describe as wraparound meetings with people in Europe, particularly who are kind of just getting up when I'm still awake late in the evening. So I'm a many hours of meetings every day. How those are sliced into individual meetings, like last couple of days, I've been working on version 14.2 and working with kind of writing about version 14.2 and finishing the design. And that's been with a large number of people, sort of rotating collection of people. Those meetings have regularly been like 5-hour meetings, cycling through somewhat different people, although I'm a constant piece of that. So that's, in some sense, one meeting that lasted 5 hours. More often, my meetings are either half an hour or 1 hour, sometimes hour and a half. Usually, that's the typical thing. I think one of the things that I learnt maybe a couple of decades ago that was important for me was, I schedule meetings absolutely back to back to back to back, no breaks. And something that was important is being able to switch from, I've just been doing a meeting about this, like right before this live stream, I was meeting about something completely, utterly different from what we're discussing in this live stream. And, for me, at this point, I've sort of trained myself to be able to switch pretty much instantaneously from one topic to another and not kind of bring the baggage from one meeting into the next meeting. Okay, I admit from time to time, when I'm frustrated enough in one meeting, I, will end up bringing some of that, and I'll kind of tell people, I say, tell me something good or whatever as to begin the meeting, because that helps reset me from being frustrated about something, some crazy thing from the previous meeting. That usually works. But I think in so what lets me get the most out of meetings, I would say having agendas is really useful. Having a thing that is kind of, this is where we're going, this is what we're trying to achieve. That's very helpful, getting sort of the scope for that. Another thing is having people in the meeting who can respond quickly to me. That is, if I'm in many meetings, I'm one of these people who likes to think in public, so to speak. I found that to be a very valuable thing from a management point of view, for getting me to think better, and so on. So what I mean by that is, rather than me sort of saying, well, let me go away and think of that, and I'll come and announce the decision to you later, it's kind of, let's figure this out here and now with the actual people who are involved, and I'm going to talk through what I'm thinking about and get reactions to that and try and sort of develop, okay, this is what we conclude. One reason that's really useful is because then people know how the decision was reached. And they also get to see the thought process. If one does a good job of figuring out the decision, they get to see that thought process, and they get to kind of model that and be able to do the same kind of thing themselves. But one of the things that's important to me in meetings when that is what's going on is that the people in the meeting can react to me in a reasonable way. I mean, in other words, if I'm saying something and it's just complete silence, and it's I never use video for meetings of that type, and occasionally I'll threaten to switch on video because nobody's responding to me, and I have no idea, whether that's because everybody is sort of distracted, or whether it's because they're thinking they don't have anything, know what to say, what it is. But so for me, it works much better if there are at least some people in a meeting who are kind of rapid response folk, who can take what I'm saying, they'll understand it immediately, they'll have a reaction to it immediately, they'll give me some feedback immediately, rather than other people who may be much better in the end at figuring out what to do, but they're going to be like, let me think about that for 10 minutes. That doesn't work as well for me in the reality of the way that I actually try and push meetings forward. I think, I find this also in doing research and science and so on. There are people who really are good muses for me, in the sense that they can react and give me feedback and make poke in different directions and so on quickly, even if maybe they often are the best people also at figuring things out altogether, but they don't have to be. It's a somewhat different skill from just leave it to me, I'll go off and 3 days later I'll have some result for you, is a little different than the skill of being a good interactor. And I think also another feature of being a good interactor like that, for me at least, is, somehow there are people who can sort of think about anything and don't get too sort of formal about, oh, I can't explain that to you, you don't understand enough for me to explain that type thing. That isn't useful in my kind of way of interacting with people in these kind of real-time fashions. It's also, I kind of find it annoying, and and I try to make sure I never do that myself. And part of it's kind of I take the point of view that one can explain sort of anything to anyone. It's a matter of how good an explainer you are, whether you succeed in doing that. And it's not, you often have to normalize your explanation based on, does your listener happen to seem to know about this or that thing? It's better to not have to outright say, do you know about this? Sometimes that's the most efficient thing to do, but sometimes that sort of creates this strange vibe that you can avoid if you're just paying attention to, do they react to that? Do they react to this type thing? And you can kind of normalize the explanation, but to take the point of view that kind of the success of an explanation is on the explainer, not on the person it's being explained to, so to speak, is what I tend to base things on. And that's something relevant in terms of people interacting with me as well. And I think also sometimes with me, it's I don't know, that the thing, I know about a decent amount of stuff, and I'm when I'm paying attention, I'm fairly quick usually at figuring things out. And when people are like if people like that, that's a good sort of way to interact. If people feel like, oh my gosh, can I figure it out faster than he can, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that doesn't create such a good kind of personal vibe, at least for me, in the interaction. Let's see. Memes comments. Apparently, there's a small island inhabited by a throng of cats. They survive because the local fish jump out of the water onto the beach. More than I know. That sounds like one of these memes that, oh, it comes from memes. It sounds like one of these memes that I'm not sure I find completely convincing. I do have to go to my day job in a little while. As I said, we're in a bit of an intense phase here, but let me try and uh, just address a couple of things here. Monica is commenting that they saw a TikTok. If you eat eggs raised on farms with cats, you'll kick the allergy. Yeah, I mean, it is the concept of eating a small amount of something you're allergic to and kind of ramping that up is a fairly sensible concept. Quite different conversation to talk about immunology, about which I can yak on for a while. Let's not go down that path here. Um, uh, ah, one of the people who's managing this live stream is commenting that based on a random week earlier in the month, they say you average about 12 meetings a week. That sounds very low. Really? That sounds, I'm not working hard enough. 12 meetings a week sounds low. I thought it was like 5 a day at least, which would get us up to twice that number at least. Well, okay. I feel lazy there. I wonder what counts as a meeting. All right, just one last thing maybe. Let's see. From John, what are your tips for consistently practicing self-discipline? I think that's deeply personality dependent. I mean, I have to say, where are the places where I'm not being self-disciplined, so to speak? First thing is that it's like, well, what am I going to do? Well, I really want to be mostly doing things that I want to do. If I'm trying to do things that I really don't want to do, that's a different story than if I'm sort of always doing things that I want to do. That makes it not really need self-discipline because I'm always driven by the fact that I want to do the things that I'm doing. Now, I can be a little bit of a procrastinator. I think I'm getting better on that in my old age. There'll be things where it's like, yeah, I got to do that. And I kind of need to be so one thing is that for certain kinds of things, I need to be in the right frame of mind to do them. So for example, with meetings, there'll be meetings where I'm reviewing some project, where it's just like I'm going to get input, I'm going to listen to things, I'm going to react to it. It's a certain type of reactive meeting. There are also meetings where the meeting starts by saying, hey, the people are telling me, hey, we need you to come up with an idea about X, Y, or Z, or we need you to write such and such a kind of thing. Those are meetings that have a different tenor from the just react type meetings. And if I'm not kind of a little bit prepped for that, and now I've got to write something or something, it takes me quite a while often to get into the groove. And sometimes I have to say, this isn't the right time. You should have put this on as a meeting where I'm going to write things, because then I kind of get myself psyched up to be able to do that. And I think so that's one thing that, one procrastinates because one isn't quite in the right mood to do that, or just in the right sort of headspace or something to do it, and better that one has some other task to do at that time. Sometimes I find, so, when I'm doing tasks and I'm getting them zipped out. I'm writing something, I just finished some grand section. Okay, then I feel very energized. And that's a good time to say, oh, let me deal with some email that I had to deal with that I hadn't been, that I hadn't gotten around to, because I'm sort of generally energized. Same thing if I'm going through and I'm managed to process 100 emails or something that are difficult ones, and then I feel like, oh, this is great. that's a good time for me to start on something else because I'm energized by doing that. I think in terms of other things, for me, it's making everything simple and habitual. So, for example, I don't know if I'm going to, I uh, take a bunch of random pills every morning, and they're in a pill sorter, and I know there's a I have to figure out what some of them are, but there are all sorts of things that I've over the years figured out would be good for me, so to speak, or think they would be. But it's kind of like there's a just a process. I just do it. I don't really have to think about it, and they're and I know what I'm doing. And when it comes to, okay, uh, like, am I going to chain eat pieces of chocolate or something? Well, the main way which I can do, and the main way I don't do that is, well, just sort of structurally only take these pieces of chocolate that are in little pieces, and then I break them into tiny pieces, and I put each tiny piece in my mouth separately. And it's kind of like, have a structure where I'm doing the right thing or the thing that I want to be doing, rather than me having to think, oh, I'm kind of avoiding doing this or whatever else. It's just like, have it be a routine thing that is the way you do it, that happens to be the way you do it, that makes you not, sort of do the thing that you think is the right thing, rather than having to think to yourself, it's kind of like, now I have to be self-disciplined about this or that. And I think that at least that's my way of doing it, so that you build it into the structure of what you're doing without having to individually think about it, feel righteous that you're doing some self-disciplined thing. Forget that. It's just like, that's the way I do it. So I know I'm going to do it that way. And it's kind of like there are things like for example, I like to make sure I walk 10,000 steps every day, and I do manage to do that. And that requires that I'm just like, there's a timer, there's a step counter, whatever. I'm just like, I don't have to think much about it. It's just like, I'm going to go on until the timer reads this, until the step count reads that, type thing. And it doesn't require kind of me actively saying, it just becomes the routine that I'm doing. And that's that's I guess my approach to that. When it comes to there are I maybe not a person, just personality wise, I'm not a person who um, I tend to do things that I kind of want to do, and I tend to fill my time with things that I want to do. And so it's less, I'm less in the situation where I have to be, can I get myself to do it type thing? Because most of the time I really want to do it. Now, even if in big picture, I really want to do that project that's going to last 5 years, there's a lot of time inside that 5 years of doing things that are much more detailed. I think one of the things for me tends to be when I'm doing some project, for example, one of the things that is not good is when I take it sort of, I have a little piece of it, it's half done, and then I sort of leave it for a while, and then I'm coming back and I'm trying to kind of graft onto what I half did. I find that very difficult, very frustrating. I often will end up going back to the beginning and restarting the whole thing. It's just not, it's not a good thing for me. For me, I know myself well enough to know I do much better when it's kind of a green field type situation where I'm just starting from scratch, on at least on some particular part of some project, if not the whole project, and sort of going from there in a fairly intense way. All right, I think uh, um, okay, I've got I'm being corrected with uh, my team is pointing out um, that they did not, they misinformed me here. I thought 12 meetings a week was incredibly light. Actually, it's more like 12. Let's see. They're saying 5 or 6 meetings a day, and uh, and in times when I'm doing organized meetings every evening, it's more like 12 a day. Okay, that sounds more correct. That sounds more like I'm okay. I don't feel as lazy anymore. It's so 12 a day when it's with evenings, it sounds about like what I'm doing. And I'm being reminded that I am late for a 30-minute meeting. And so I have got to make my now that I know I'm not being lazy and only doing 12 meetings a week, I got to go back and uh, do a do a meeting here, even though I see a comment about cat islands around Japan where there are more cats than people. Okay, this is fun. Um, and uh, it's uh, I'm not going to start um, talking about alien intelligences and the intelligence of cats. And it does remind me, however, that sometimes we're developing products and so on, and there'll be an issue of, oh, I don't know, something like, I don't know, the color space that we're using. And it's like, well, we can use red, green, blue. And it's like, but what about the mantis shrimp, which has 15 color receptors? What about the cats and dogs, which only have two? And I have to point out, humans are our market at this time. Actually, I should revise that because it's now humans and AIs are our market, and not the purchase decisions, so to speak. The usage decisions are not being made, at this time at least, by cats. And with that, I probably should wrap up for today. Thanks for lots of interesting questions and look forward to chatting another time. Bye for now.